p.m. Eastern Time. You have joined the FY 2018 Second Chance Act Grantee Orientation webinar, hosted by the National Reentry Resource Center and the Bureau of Justice Assistance. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the webinar. My name is Nicole Jarrett, Director of Corrections and Reentry at the Council State Government's Justice Center, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly talk through a couple of house cleaning items about how the webinar is going to work. Anytime during this webinar, you can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A panel at the bottom right-hand portion of your screen. We will keep a running list of the content-related questions that we receive and then ask the panelists to respond to the questions during the last segment of the webinar. We'll do our best to get through as many questions as possible. If you encounter technical or audio problems during this webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. Please understand that there are some technical issues we may not be able to resolve. For this reason, we are recording this event and we'll post it on our website at www.nationalreentryresourcecenter.org. We should have the webinar posted online early next week, and once it's been posted, we will email you a link of the recording. I'm excited to be joined by our colleagues in this endeavor, Second Chance Act, technical assistance work. From the Bureau of Justice Assistance, I'm joined by Ruby Closeout, Associate Deputy Director for Justice Systems Policy, Jennifer Lewis, a State Policy Advisor, E. Tracy A. Willis, another State Policy Advisor, Jennifer Johnson, Senior Research Associate with Booz Allen Hamilton, and Lauren DeHame, Senior Research Associate at Carnival Associates. Thank you. So at this point, I'm going to, during today's webinar, we are going to, I'm going to officially congratulate you, I should start off that way, on your Second Chance Act Award. It was a very competitive process this year, as it is every year, and we couldn't be more excited about the exciting projects that you all have proposed. Very ambitious, but we are with you every step of the way. Next, we'll spend some time talking about the National Reentry Resource Center, and then we're going to spend a good portion of this session here today talking about your post-award grant management and federal compliance. This is please pay careful attention to this. All of you are in this process right now and of accepting your awards and paying attention to your special conditions. We'll go over what the reporting requirements are, and then we'll end the session today with some Q&A. So at this point, let me turn it over to Ruby.
Great. Great. Thank you so much, Nicole, and welcome everybody. And I'd like to second Nicole's congratulations to all of you. She's right. It was, again, another really competitive year, and so we are really happy to welcome you to the SCA family. You might be new, or your jurisdiction might be new to this federal funding source. If you are, welcome, and if you're returning, we're happy to have you back and to be able to get the opportunity to work with you and your jurisdiction and your community partners again. This year is also a special year because it marks the 10th anniversary of the passage of the Second Chance Act and it being signed into law, and the availability of these federal funds to jurisdictions and also to nonprofit organizations around the country. This year, we've got 71 adult grantees that we're supporting through funding programs through the Bureau of Justice Assistance, as well as another 15 juvenile focused grantees, and that those funds were offered and administered by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, also here at the Justice Department. On the next slide, you can see the breakdown for the adult grantee cohort, and those are the folks that are on the phone with us today. So you can see we've got 13 grantees that are focusing on the high need and complex population to serve those adults that are reentering communities from jails and prisons with co-occurring substance use and mental health disorders. The largest spike there and the biggest part of the cohort are our nonprofit service providers and communities that are meeting people at the doors of correctional facilities and easing that successful reentry back into communities and brokering a lot of services. Then we've got 7 innovations in reentry awards that are made, who are both doing demonstration projects and also shoring up systems change to close gaps and deficits in reentry that can be sustained after the grant funding ends. And they're joined by 5 Innovations in Supervision awardees, also coming on board as part of our innovation suite with research partners in hand to learn about how we can make community supervision more effective given the local environment. And then we've got 4 statewide recidivism reduction grantees that will continue on with us in an implementation phase. They have done hard work to figure out what is driving the statewide recidivism rate and proposing to make system-wide change across the state that can address those drivers of recidivism. On the following slide is a brief snapshot of the juvenile justice grantees. They also have a focus on youth with co-occurring disorders, another one on anti-gang strategies, and then a much bigger focus you can see on the needs of incarcerated parents within correctional facilities and how to make change and increase parenting skills and reconnect to children post-release. On the next slide, just a little bit about the Bureau of Justice Assistance and about our approach to these programs and to working with you. I think over the past 10 years in standing up these programs, we have honed and matured them. We've learned a lot about what it takes to be successful, both on our end and on your end. What kind of partnerships does it take? What kinds of data does it take? How you can work best with research and evaluation partners. And also what it takes in terms of training and technical assistance to get you there. And so before I hand the presentation back to Dr. Jarrett at the Council of State Governments, who oversees the National Reentry Resource Center, I just want to introduce that relationship. So in terms of, or in addition to funding the awards that I've just gone over, we also provide federal funding to stand up and continue support for the National Reentry Resource Center. And not only are they the one-stop clearinghouse for what works in reentry, and they continue to build the evidence of knowledge and communicate that to the larger reentry field, but they're also responsible for partnering with you and helping you successfully get to goal in terms of meeting the goals and objectives of the federal funding that you've received. And what we expect of them, and Nicole will go over this as well, is a real partnership with the grantees, that you'll be assigned a coach, that you'll have regular calls and communication with them. And their job is to cheer you on as much as it is to challenge you. And we really expect that to be a partnership and there to be good two-way communication between the grantees and our technical assistance provider. And then know that you've got a whole slew of folks over at the Bureau of Justice Assistance that are overseeing the awards and the cohorts and the programs and what they're yielding, as we're very much aware of the fact that we are responsible for communicating these investments. I call their grants and cooperative agreements, and we refer to them as investments because we expect returns and service provision and people's lives that are going to be impacted and change. And so we're looking at that from a global perspective so that we're better able to help you, but also to communicate lessons learned and what's coming out of these awards back to the appropriators in Congress and also to stakeholders in the field at large. So thank you for being a part of the SCA family, and I'm going to turn you back over to Dr. Jarrett from the National Reentry Resource Center. Thanks, Nicole.
Great. Thanks, Ruby. So the National Reentry Resource Center is funded and administered by BJA, and it's the nation's primary source of information and guidance on reentry. We deliver technical assistance and training to SDA grantees, all of you. We try to help advance the knowledge base of the reentry field. And if you go to our website, you'll see all these different icons on our homepage. Those represent different project areas. And so you'll see a whole slew of information out there from webinars as well as publications, some original and some from resources around the field. We also promote what works in reentry and successes of grantees, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. We facilitate peer networks and information exchange, and we provide information for people returning to communities and their families. So on the next slide, now that you have your award, you may be wondering what expectations we may have of all of you. I will first say one big tip is to go back and revisit and reread the original solicitation that you responded to. It provides a lot of good guidance, especially in this stage in which you're setting up your project. And the first piece is that you would meet your project objectives. We're really excited to see those things come to fruition, that you complete your planning and implementation guide, that you would use validated risk and needs assessment instruments, and also the most appropriate evidence-based practices that serve your target population, and that you would track your progress and complete a project evaluation. And you will hear us beat this drum quite a bit. It is so important for you to be thinking about your evaluation early on, and that you consider your evaluator as part of the core project team. And so we've gotten the question a few times in the past, should our evaluator join the technical assistance calls? Yes, by all means. And that another expectation, last but not least, is that you would communicate regularly with your TA provider, your TA coach, and that you would seek help when needed. That's what we're here for. So on the next slide, there are some things that you should be expecting from us, and that's ongoing and timely support from not only BJA, but also from us at the NRRC. We do work very closely together. We are a team. We communicate regularly and often, and we have this policy that there's no wrong door, that we will connect. If you have a question, we will connect you to the right person. On the next slide, I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about the role of your NRRC TA provider. What is the coach going to be doing? So a lot of our work is done through distance-based TA. So we'll be doing monthly calls and trainings and distance learning opportunities, but we also will be doing some site visits, and we look forward to seeing you in person when possible. And we really believe and understand that your project is unique, and so our TA is very much tailored to your project. We want to understand the context of what's happening in your jurisdiction, what brought you to land on this specific set of goals and objectives. And that's part of the reason why we have this ongoing communication. We want to be there in real time as your project unfolds. On the next slide, getting a little bit more specific, your TA coaches will help connect you to subject matter experts, recommend publications and online resources, host peer learning opportunities. Next slide. Share evidence-based practices and promising strategies to overcome implementation barriers. We know that there's a lot of information out there. We've had a lot of experience in this space, and coming alongside with you and brainstorming with you about specific challenges and helping to supplement new ideas on top of what you've already proposed is something that we are really excited about doing. We also promote the innovative work that's being done by all of you, and we work, again, closely with BJA to promote grant management and reporting requirements. Again, we are working as a team, and if you have any questions about how to move forward, you can, of course, direct them to BJA, but you can also bring it up with us and know that we'll also direct you to BJA. All right, next slide. So in addition to your TA coach, there's a whole host of resources available at the National Reentry Resource Center on our website. That includes the latest news and resources. We have a directory for state and local reentry services. So individuals who are coming out who have direct questions, they are able to get specific information related to what's happening in their community. And we have a National Criminal Justice Initiatives map that is a great resource if you want to know about other federal initiatives around the work around reentry and criminal justice. You can click on that and see what's happening in your state. As I alluded to a number of times, that all of you are part of helping us to advance the knowledge base in the field. As you know, there is no one model of reentry out there. One of the exciting things about SEA is that this funding support really helps promote some innovation in the field. And so we are looking forward to working with you to really promote individual success stories demonstrating human impact, as well as measurable progress, including recidivism reduction, the number of participants that are being served, what was unique about your program, and here are some snapshots of work done by previous SEA grantees in the field. So this is our large overview webinar across the different grant programs. I encourage all of you to participate in the grant program specific webinars. So this is where you'll get more information about what the expectations are for your specific grant program. And we will share some successful strategies, and we'll also discuss the planning and implementation guide, or for some of you have just a planning guide. We often get the question, who should participate in those webinars? Your key project team should participate in those webinars, including your evaluator if he or she is already on board. And you will see here a list of dates and times for those webinars. And if you haven't received it yet, you will soon get the registration link. I know sometimes with these initial emails, sometimes things get bounced back or get into spam. So just let us know if you haven't received your registration, and we will make sure to get that out to you. Next slide. So next, I'm going to be turning it over to Jennifer. Thank you.
Hi, this is Jennifer Johnson, and I am joined here with my colleague, Lauren Duhame. We are basically going to give you a really quick overview today about what we mean when we say performance measures. There is, just want to say this up front, there's going to be a longer training about performance measures, the questions that we'll be asking you to report on, as well as navigating the tool, the online tool, which collects the information. Throughout November, we'll be doing those trainings. And this is going to be a different set of trainings than the ones that Dr. Jarrett just mentioned on the previous slide. It's just going to be focused on performance measures. But for today, we just wanted to plant the seeds so that people know why we do performance measure collection and when that happens, and some really high-level systems kinds of things, so it makes it a little bit more tangible for people who might not have done performance measure reporting with BJA programs before. If you are a previous grantee that has had performance measures tool reporting as part of your responsibilities before, then this is going to be very much in line with what you might already know, but for people who haven't had this is just an overview, so you get a taste. Okay, well, essentially, so we have just very simple objectives today for what we want to make sure you know. We want to just make sure that you understand why we require performance measures, some high-level overview about what the reporting requirements for performance measures are, a little bit of a taste about what the questionnaire for performance measures would look like, and then we'll give you a little bit of a snapshot about what our performance measurement tool is, give you a sense of where to go to access it and what to do to get started in it. All right, so why do we ask you to report performance measures? Well, it's a method of communication between all the good work that everybody does on the ground and us. It really helps us to hone in on, okay, what are our areas of success, maybe potential areas of improvement, and it really helps us, knowing what you're up to on the ground helps us to figure out, are there any system-wide improvements we need to make? Is there internal training, technical assistance that we could focus on? How do we communicate back to you better about anything? How do we communicate out to other people outside of our world, but in the public, about what's going on? It's also just a way for tracking activity and progress, essentially accountability. It helps us to know, are you meeting your goals? How are you meeting your goals? Are you kind of following what you wanted to set out to do? It helps us with anything we need in terms of decision making for the program design, program decisions. It helps us to know just basically how our money is being used. And of course, we're all in the game of basically making sure that we communicate the impact of what money is being spent towards, our investments, so to speak. It helps us to plan for the future when we go up and go to people in Congress, et cetera. And it helps us to respond to external requests from people in Congress, the media, et cetera, about what's going on. And let's not forget, there's laws in place, the Government Performance and Results Modernization Act of 2010. So basically, this fleshes that kind of thing out. Next slide. So essentially, what are we going to do with your performance measures once we've collected them all in a system? We make it our goal to compile information to reports that are available to the public at a high level. Not necessarily zoning in on what Grantee X is doing necessarily, but just to give an understanding of overall how these dollars are providing this kind of impact. We try to highlight your program accomplishments. And of course, the snapshots that you see on the page are just some of the public-facing documents. But of course, otherwise, we're looking at your data as well, just trying to inform some of those decisions that we need to as we figure out how to run these programs for you better. All right. So here's just a little bit of a taste of what we mean when we say performance measures. Like, what are these performance measures and pieces of information we're asking you to report actually look like? We're not going to go in today into the actual performance measures for your grant programs because all of the grant programs have different performance measures. We'll tackle that issue when we have the more dedicated performance measure training coming up later in November for you. But essentially, the kind of things that you can expect to be asked are, on a quarterly basis, every quarter, we ask more short answer kind of questions, things that we know are quantifiable, things that are, pick the best, pick all the options that apply, maybe provide some short answers. So on a quarterly basis, ongoing, it's mostly short answer kind of questions. Semi-annually, we're going to ask you what we call narrative questions, and these really focus on goals, objectives, challenges, accomplishments. They're open-ended. Of course, you can quantify things, but really it helps us to capture things that aren't necessarily just captured within our pre-formulated performance measures that we're asking you. It helps us to it helps give you a space to communicate to us in a more open-ended fashion. All right. So in terms of when we would expect you to provide us that PMT reporting, the performance management tool reporting, so every quarter we'll be asking you to go into the performance measurement tool to report data. So every 3 months. The months are typically October to December, January to March, January to March, April to July, and April to June and August to September. It's really hard when I try to do that off from the top of my head. But essentially, you'll be reporting in January, for instance, on the activities that you performed in October through December. So essentially, at the end of your period of activity, your quarterly period of activity, you'll have the next month, or 30 days about, to go into the performance management or measurement tool to provide your data. So that's on the quarterly basis. And then semi-annually, so 2 times out of the year, in addition to doing the regular quarterly reporting of short answer type of questions, semi-annually, you will be asked to provide those narrative answers for questions around things like goals, objectives, accomplishments, barriers, etc. And then at closeout, before you close out your grant, you will be requesting an additional set of questions for you to answer. In addition to another, if it's not, on the regular 6-month cycle, we'll be requesting that you provide a narrative report as well. Same thing as the ones that you do semi-annually, but just again, you have the opportunity to do it at closeout. All right, next slide. So here is just in one handy chart the schedule with the months laid out and the due dates for the types of information we'll be requesting, such as the program performance measures, which are more short answer, or the narrative questions, or the closeout measures, and when we'll be asking you to put into the system by. So if you are a new grantee at this point, starting a new award, essentially the first time you would go into the system is in January, and you would be reporting for October through December activities. And you will only be able to go into the system report information in the month of January. You may not have a lot to report at that time because you might be very new, but at least it'll provide opportunity to at least check in and with some information. All right, next slide. So if you want to see the questions that we'll be asking you, these are the links to the various questionnaires. As you can see, they're different for every single program. Now, the very bottom line is a link for, essentially, it's something that all the programs have to answer. It's a supplementary list of questions that have to do with healthcare related access. All right, next slide. So basically, if you're curious about the measures you're going to have to report, go in and look at those links, and we highly recommend that you do that ahead of time so you know how to track things and set up systems for tracking things going forward. This is just a snapshot of those semi-annual narrative questions I mentioned, the open-ended ones. As you can see, it's things like, what have you accomplished in the last 6 months? What goals are you hoping to accomplish? What are some barriers? What are any good news stories that you care to share? Good open-ended questions that leave breadth for you to answer in whatever way you think, in the ways that you think are substantive. Okay, next slide. And then this is just a snapshot, an excerpt really, of the kind of information we asked for at closeout. So even though you only get presented with this at the very last quarter that you'll be reporting for, we ask you to be mindful of it and prepare by tracking this information throughout the period of your grant. And it's essentially focusing on understanding any court or criminal involvement data that people within the programs you are serving might have encountered. So if you don't have for instance, some statewide recidivism reduction programs don't necessarily focus on serving that end person coming out of, coming through reentry programs. But many of you do have this, and we do ask that you pay close attention and track the outcomes for those individuals throughout the program. Okay, so that's just a taste of the kind of questions that we'll be asking you through performance measure reporting. And then these are just a couple of slides about where you can find the PMT. So essentially, the PMT is an online system. There's a link at the bottom of this slide for you to be able to get to it. Every single quarter, you'll have a window that you can go into and report the data for. Okay, next slide. So basically, we won't go through a deep navigation overview today. The only thing that we want to impress upon you is that there are some things that you'll have to do to get started, like logging in and account creation and making sure your user profile is up and running. And we also just wanted to make sure that you knew that once you do get into the system with your account created, there will be resources available in the PMT. So what we're going over today is just real basics. Okay, next slide. All right, so essentially, what we want to impress upon you here is that you will be getting somebody on your team who is listed as the point of contact within our grant management system at BJA will be receiving an email sometime between now and January that gives them instructions on how to set up a user account so that you can report into the performance measurement tool in January. All right. So, next slide. These are just snapshots to give a little bit more detail about some of the information you might be getting in that email, but that email will tell you what to do, so we don't have to go through that in much detail today. So let's go on to the next slide. All right, this is just a snapshot of what it'll look like when you get into the system, and we can go to the next slide. So essentially, one of the things that you'll do when you get into the system and create your account, you'll be presented with a user profile that we would like you to just make sure you have filled out correctly. Okay, so next slide. And so once you have that user profile filled out, then you're good to go. And you can add new users so that they can also become people with access to put in information for the PMT. All right, next slide. And of course, once you have your account up and running, just be mindful that there is an information and resources part of the PMT. It'll have things like, just an overview of our reporting schedule. It'll have trainings that have been recorded in the past that you can refer to, user guides, the list of measures that you'll be reporting against, frequently asked questions. So we always say you should always feel free to contact us, but also if you just need references, these are here. All right, next slide. So that is essentially what we wanted to cover today. Hopefully this whole idea around performance measurement reporting is a little bit more tangible now for people who haven't gone through it before. We are going to be having these training webinars come up soon throughout November. These are different from the ones that CSG is going to be facilitating that are more geared towards things like the planning and implementation guides and things like that. But essentially look out for an email that will be coming to your POC soon with this information. And these webinars will be recorded in case you need them in the future, but we definitely look forward to your attendance at those. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. And now I'll turn it over to Jennifer Lewis.
Hello, everyone. On behalf of BJA Programs Office SCA team, we want to say congratulations and thank you for tuning in to our presentation. My name is Jennifer Lewis, not to be confused with Jennifer Johnson, who just spoke previously about PMT. I will be presenting along with my colleague Tracy Willis on the post-award grant management and federal compliance, effective programs through a solid foundation. As Nicole mentioned earlier, Tracy and I are the BJA State Policy Advisors, which basically means we're a direct contact for your managing your grant award. And we do have an additional colleague on our team, Zafa Stork, but unfortunately she could not join us today. I'll begin presenting the first half of the presentation, and then Tracy will finish up with the second half. So with that being said, let's get started. We have a lot of information to cover. Just an overview of what we will be discussing today: special conditions, reporting, financial information, unallowable costs, procurement, subawards, subrecipient monitoring, federal reporting requirements, grant adjustment notices, grant monitoring compliance, additional information, and resources. Next slide. Special conditions are the terms and conditions that are included with the award. They include additional requirements such as programmatic and financial reporting, prohibited use of federal funds, consultative changes in key personnel, and proper disposition of program income. There are several mandatory special conditions that will be included on any DOJ award, and we provided you with a link here. There's some special conditions that may be based on the program or the nature of the award itself. Your awards contain special conditions that require compliance with data collection and reporting as detailed in your solicitation or your award documents. And some second chance awards include special conditions requiring the submission of the final analysis and evaluation report to be submitted prior to the award closeout. Next slide. So here's an example of your award document special condition page. Please make sure to read through each special condition carefully because they might include a withholding that needs to be addressed. Next slide. Okay, additional withholding special conditions. These conditions place holds on funds for overdue reports or pending budget approvals or other program requirements, including documentation that was missing or incomplete when the grant application was reviewed. Most second chance awards have a required planning or action plan. You need to work with your NRRC technical assistance coach and program partners to complete this requirement. And most of the awards include a related special condition withholding that limits the spending until the planning documents are submitted and approved. It's important to work with us to remove any active special condition withholdings so your agency can expend, obligate, or draw down award funds. And then just a FYI, we do anticipate a delay in budget clearances this year. A little bit about progress reporting requirements. I know Jennifer just spoke a little bit about that with PMT. There's two reporting systems: the PMT system, that's reported quarterly in the PMT system, and then you have your progress report submitted through GMS. That's reported semi-annually in GMS. So in GMS, this requires you to upload your PDF versions of your PMT into the report in the grants management system. And the semi-annual report includes responses to the BJA narrative questions. So for your final progress report, if your grant requires an evaluation as part of the project, you must attach the evaluation report under the final progress report in GMS. So just note that GMS automatically freezes grant funds for any delinquent reports, so it's important to submit those reports on time. Next slide. And court and criminal involvement, like Jennifer said in the previous presentation, grantees are required to track recidivism data as required by your signed assurance form that you submitted at the time of application. The CCI data must be collected through the award period and reported in the final PMT report. And we provided the measures below, and Jennifer also discussed a little bit of it through the PMT slides. Next slide. Federal financial reporting, that's SF425. This is to be reported quarterly in GMS, and typically for reports due right after you accepted the award, there's no activities, so you submit that report as 0. And we provided training links on how to report the FFR. And then if you have any financial questions, please contact our OCFO customer service. Next slide. Just important reminders for submitting your financial report. You want to report actual funds obligated and or expended, not your drawdown amount. Report from the recipient level. Report the correct match requirement. So once match is approved, the amount cannot be changed. Program income as a cumulative amount, not a quarterly amount. Correct indirect cost rate or base applied by your cognizant agency. You want to report correct indirect cost rate type, whether it's provisional, fixed, or final. And you want to report every quarter regardless of whether or not the expenses were incurred. Next slide. Okay, financial information. Recipients agree to read and comply with the financial and administrative requirements set forth under current financial guide. And to be allowable under federal awards, costs must be reasonable, allocable, and necessary to the project, and they must comply with the funding statute requirements. So for guidance, grantees should refer to their original solicitation, the program guidelines, the award special conditions, and the approved budget. And then we also included additional resources like the cost principles and uniform guidance, which are available in the links provided here. Next slide. Okay, completion of the grant's financial management training is required for point of contacts and financial point of contacts listed in GMS within 120 days of award acceptance. Failure to comply will result in withholding special condition. So there are two formats for training that you can choose from. You can either go online and complete the 24-module training, or you can do an in-person format, and we provided you with a link for the courses to register here. Next slide. Unallowable costs. So this includes land acquisition, lobbying, fundraising, compensation for federal employees, travel of Department of Justice employees, state and local sales taxes, corporate formation, costs incurred outside the project period, entertainment and food and beverage, bonuses and commissions, and program-specific unallowable costs. Next slide. In addition to unallowable costs identified in the financial guide, Second Chance Act awards may not be used for prizes, rewards, entertainment, trinkets, or any type of monetary incentives, client stipends, gift cards, vehicles, costs that do not support the approved project activities. And then note that direct representation in litigation through court filings or other litigation services is not allowable under 2018 funding. Sub-awards and procurement contracts. So the proper determination of whether a pass-through entity is a sub-award or a procurement contract is critical because there are different requirements or rules that apply to sub-awards versus procurement contracts. So you must remember that the substance of the relationship should be given greater consideration than the form of the agreement between the prime recipient and the outside entity. If you delegate program activities to another entity, individual, consultant, or organization, that delegation would generally be considered a sub-award. Most pass-through entities on their awards are programmatic and substantive, and therefore should be classified as sub-awards. So tip, in any OJP award in which the recipient entity proposes to collaborate or partner with another entity to accomplish its work, the agreement by the recipient to pay the collaborator is very likely to be a sub-award rather than a procurement contract. So specifically, program evaluators and research partners are award collaborators and therefore are classified to be a sub-recipient. Next slide. Okay. If the OJP recipient proposes to enter into an agreement to pay award funds to an outside entity and the outside entity will not be carrying out all or part of a public purpose of the award, but instead only be providing ancillary goods or services, OJP will consider the agreement to be a procurement contract under the award. So a tip, if the purchase or lease of an item that makes the identical item widely available to others is considered a procurement contract. An example is an office equipment, software licensing, etc. Another tip is if the recipient is obtaining services from an outside entity that makes it identical services widely available to others, OJP will consider that to be a procurement contract under the award. An example would be internet, cell phone service, maintenance, and website hosting, etc. Next. Okay, a sole source is a procurement by non-competitive proposal. They must adhere to the standards set forth in the Title II CFR. Sole source approval is required by OJP if a recipient determines that the award of a procurement contract through a competitive process is infeasible. So the threshold must be greater than $150,000. So recipients may conduct non-competitive procurement through solicitation of proposals from only one source when one or more of the following circumstances apply. The item service is available from one source. The public exigency or emergency for the requirement will not permit a delay resulting from competitive solicitation. Completion is determined inadequate after solicitation of a number of sources. And you must submit a sole source approval gain in GMS for approval. Next. So for the additional guidance on subawards, contracts, please review the toolkit, the checklist, and the fact sheets provided in the links here. And now I'll turn it over to Tracy for the second half of our presentation.
Hi guys. This is Tracy Willis, and like Jennifer, I am a part of the Second Chance Act team here at BJA, so hopefully I will get a chance to talk to most of you guys. The first section I'll be going over is the subrecipient management and monitoring requirements. Recipients must have written subrecipient monitoring policies and procedures that meet the requirements under 2 FR 200-331. And the purpose of monitoring activities is to provide reasonable assurance that the subrecipient has administered the pass-through funding in compliance with the laws, regulations, and the provisions of the award, and that the required performance goals are being achieved. Next slide. The next two slides are the requirements for the pass-through entities of 2 CFR 200.331. Next. Okay. And when you're monitoring the subrecipient, you must make sure that you review the financial and performance reports and provide follow-up to ensure that the subrecipient takes timely and appropriate action on all deficiencies pertaining to the federal award provided to the subrecipient from the pass-through entity. Make sure you issue a management decision for audit findings pertaining to the federal award provided to the subrecipient from the pass-through entity as required. Next slide. These are key components to effective subrecipient sub-award monitoring. A sub-award agreement that specifies tasks and requires progress in financial reporting, as well as possible noncompliance penalties and termination procedures, monitoring policies and procedures, a risk-based monitoring plan for selecting subrecipients to monitor, and a process for on-site monitoring to include a checklist that certifies administrative, financial, and programmatic elements, process for documenting findings in the report, and procedures for follow-up on issues for resolution. Next slide. This slide speaks to the FFATA reporting. This is the end of the month following your sub-award. The FFATA requires information on federal awards be made available to the public via a single searchable website, which is listed here, www.usaspending.gov. FSRS is the FAFATA subaward reporting system, and it's used to capture and report subaward and executive compensation data regarding the first-tier subawards to meet the FAFATA reporting requirements. Prime recipients of awards, $25,000 or more, report on any first-tier subawards of $25,000 or more. And to help you navigate this process, listed below is a link that includes FAQs, online demos, and additional information about FAFATA. Next slide. The next slide speaks to the FAPIIS reporting, which requires grantees to report information on certain civil, criminal, and administrative proceedings submitted to the Federal Designated Integrity and Performance System within the System for Award Management. And there's a link provided for that. OJP grants and cooperative agreements that exceed $500,000 typically will include a condition that requires the recipient, if the total value of its currently active grants, cooperative agreements, and procurement contracts from all federal agencies exceed $10 million as set out in the condition, to report particular information on civil, criminal, and administrative proceedings connected with or connected to the performance of either its OJP award or any other grant, cooperative agreement, contract from federal government. Again, there's a link provided for additional information. Next slide. This slide speaks to what you guys will come to know as GANs, and the GANs are processed through the grants management system. A GAN is used to make project changes, corrections, scope changes, grant extensions, budget modifications, and runs the gamut. The next point gives a list of the types of GANs that you will see when you log into the grants management system. GANs will not be approved unless you are up to date on all reporting, financial and progress. So I ask my grantees that put in a request. When they call, I say, ensure that you are not delinquent. Your GAN will be placed on hold until you are up to date on your reporting. Next slide. Okay, there we go. Grant project period, no cost extensions, which is one of the most popular ones. In order to have your GAN processed, you must submit it through the GMS system at least 30 days prior to the current end date. So, of course, if your grant ends on December 30th, you would need to submit your request prior to December 1. And in my case, I usually ask my grantees to make it maybe 3 months to give themselves a cushion. Generally, no more than one extension may be made to an award. A no-cost extension may not exceed 12 months past the original end date. So it's usually a minimum of 6, a maximum of 12. So I usually when I have a conversation with my grantees, I ask them, to look at the scope of what they're requesting and to make sure that they are requesting enough time to complete what they need to complete. And again, that goes back to the no more than one extension per award. A no-cost extension may be made only for award recipients that have no significant performance or compliance issues. Again, delinquent reports, constant findings in reports. So we just ask that you, be clear and straight on that. Next slide. Award period change GAN requirements. Include the following info. When you submit a GAN to change your award period, no cost extension, be sure that you include these 5 important attachments to your GAN. What is your current unobligated balance? explain why the program could not be completed in the allotted amount of time, give a description of what will be taking place during the extended period, explain how the funds will be used during the extended period, and then provide a detailed, robust justification on the benefits to the federal government on why we should approve this particular type of GAN. And please note, just because you have funds left over is not a justifiable reason for extending your award. So again, that really speaks to number 5, where it talks about providing a robust justification. Additional narratives are required to establish extenuating circumstances for requests over 1 year. Such extenuating circumstances may include natural disasters, litigation, state or local legislative or regulatory schedules for research and statistic projects, delayed IRB actions or OMB reviews, data collection, analysis, and etc. Next slide. This is the change of project scope, GAN. Prior approval is needed when you want to make a change to your approved application. That could be from altering project activities, changing the purpose, changing the project site, the population, changing your subgrantee or contact. So basically, anything you want to change within your program you have to provide a program, a change of scope GAN. We want you to make sure you work with your TA coach for assistance prior to submitting any GAN. Next slide. Another most used GAN is the budget modification. And the process of processing a GAN for budget modification is like reviewing a new budget. By that I mean when you submit your GAN to modify your budget, you must attach a revised budget and a revised budget narrative that's reflective of column 3 in the GAN. And when you log into the GAN and select the budget modification GAN, you will know what I mean when I say column 3. So column 3, your attachments must reflect column 3. Prior approval is needed when proposing the following changes. A budget adjustment affects a cost category that was not included in the original budget, change to your indirect costs, and then there's the 10% rule is exceeded. That means the proposed cumulative changes is greater than 10% of the total award. Does not apply to an award of less than $100,000. So if what you're requesting is more than 10% of the total award, then what you would submit would be a budget modification GAN. If your changes is less than 10%, you would submit what's called a program office approval GAN, but still attach a revised budget and revised budget narrative. Next slide. This is the GAN in reference to publication plan submissions. All grantees and cooperative agreements should begin submitting publications for review via GAN and GMS. This applies to major publications such as evaluations or final reports. Grantees cannot use DOJ, OJP, or BJA logo without explicit prior approval. The grantee must select Program Office Approval GAN and mark the publication plan submission or other publication review, and then attach their publication into the GAN module. The grantee should explain their publication, date, distribution, target audience in the GAN explanation block or in an attachment. In all materials publicizing or resulting from awards, with the exception of press release, the awarding agency assistance must be acknowledged. An acknowledgement of support shall be made through use of the following or comparable footnote, and that's listed below. Next slide. BJA compliance monitoring. BJA will conduct formal monitoring activities either via site visits and desk reviews of grant recipients to ensure that the grantee is conducting activities as proposed and approved, meeting the programmatic, administrative, and fiscal requirements, identifying and resolving problems and or issues, and receiving needed training and guidance. Next slide. BJA compliance monitoring, common issues for resolution. Unauthorized obligation of funds in violation of grant, withholding special conditions and or prior to budget clearance. Incorrect classification of subawards as a procurement contract. The use of funds for consultant rates in excess of $650 per day without explicit prior approval from BJA via a GAN. Our accounting policies and procedures are not documented or need improvement and lack a tracking award expenditures by approved budget category and lacking. Indirect cost rate charged improperly, rate expired, lack of budget modification GAN submission to reflect current rate agreement. Next slide. BJA compliance monitoring, common issues for resolution. These are additional ones. Lack of subrecipient monitoring policies, no submission of GAN for prior approval of award changes, lack of compliance with FFATA, lack of documentation to support match and expenditure, and lack of documentation to support performance measurement data. And that's a lot in terms of GANs, but that's basically saying we want you guys to stay in contact with us about any changes that you make to the award, because we want to both be on the same page. Next slide. Single audit requirements. Non-federal entities that expend $750,000 or more in federal funds in the organization's fiscal year are required to arrange for a single single organization-wide audit conducted in accordance with the provisions of Title II, CFR, Subpart F. The non-federal entities that expend less than the applicable audit threshold a year in federal awards are exempt from the federal audit requirements for that year. Audit reports are due no later than 9 months after the close of each fiscal year during the term of the award and must be submitted electronically to the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, and there is the link provided for you. Next slide. And listed here is the top single audit findings from FY 2016. I don't really need to go through all of them, but you definitely can see that those are some serious issues. So, again, please pay close attention to these types of findings that are being found in the audits. Next page. Here, for additional information, you have our BJA website. Here you have a list of the state policy advisors and also the link to other funding opportunities and FAQs as it relates to BJA funding. Next page. Additional links. BJA has a Grant Writing and Management Academy. The link to there. This link right here, this GMS, I need you guys to make sure you circle it, bookmark it, however you want to do it onto your desktop, because this is where we're definitely going to be keeping in contact with you guys. So this is the link to GMS with the FAQs, the training, the help desk. Here's the link to the PMT. And then also here's links to other OJP-type resources that we have, along with the forms and instructions dealing with OJP. Next slide. Another slide you guys probably want to bookmark is the names of your state policy advisors as they relate to Second Chance. My colleague Jennifer Lewis, myself, Tracy Willis, and our other colleague, Zafra Stork. Here is our number and our emails, so make sure you use them. And if you have any questions not covered in this portion of the presentation, please contact one of us, and we will do our best to work together and make things happen. Next person on the chart.
I'll take it, Tracy. Thank you. And that was a lot of information, and I will reiterate the importance of looking at your DOJ Grants Financial Guide, and there were a number of really helpful links. So I'll just reiterate that this PowerPoint slide deck will be available online starting early next week, and we will actually send you, if you're registered for this webinar, we will actually send you the link as soon as it becomes available, and you can do all the highlighting and circling and looking up as needed. We did get some questions throughout this webinar. We are actually at time, but all of the questions really were around, mostly around making adjustments and more questions towards the back end of this presentation. And so we will follow up more directly with each one of you because, as you can imagine, getting into grant program specific questions is probably not the best use of this particular time. But thank you all for your attention and participation, and I'll just reiterate how excited we are that you're part of the SDA family. All right, take care. Oh, and one last housekeeping before you all go. There's going to be a short evaluation at the end, and if you could just take some time to answer a few questions for us, it really helps us to improve our webinars moving forward, and this is a key form of communication for us. So thank you for that time in advance. Take care.